I took the job because I needed money, not because I had any great desire to work in a hospital, especially not the night shift. I was 23, barely out of a community college program I never finished, and my rent was due. My buddy worked at the hospital and said they were desperate for nighttime security. No experience required. Just walk the halls, check the doors, report anything weird. Easy cash. They put me in Building C, the older wing that barely gets used anymore. During the day, there's outpatient physical therapy on the first floor, but by the time I clock in at 11 p.m., the place is a ghost town. I was told my main job was making sure nobody wandered in off-the-street junkies, homeless people, bored teenagers. I could handle that. What they didn't tell me was how it felt to walk those empty halls alone. The building has that hospital smell, you know? Stale disinfectant, something faintly sour underneath it, like old skin or wet bandages. And in the middle of the night, the air feels thicker somehow, like you're breathing in something meant to stay hidden. It's always too quiet, except when it's not. When I first started, I thought I was hearing things' footsteps at the far end of a hallway, doors creaking open a second before I reached them. I blamed it on nerves, or the way old buildings settle, until I started seeing the lights. Not the flickering fluorescents, those are just part of the charm. I mean the call lights. The ones above patient rooms, the ones that are supposed to mean someone needs help. Only, there's no one in those rooms. This whole wing's been empty for months, maybe longer. The nurse's station is dark, the equipment carts are shoved into closets, and the doors to the patient rooms stand open like dark mouths. But the lights still come on. I made the mistake, the first time it happened, of going inside to check. Room 308. The light above the door was glowing orange, and when I stepped in, the air hit me like I'd walked into a freezer. The bed was stripped bare, the monitor beside it unplugged, but I could hear something faint and raspy, like a dry throat trying to cough. I stood there, trying to convince myself it was the air vents or the old pipes, but the sound got louder, closer, until it was right beside me. I didn't see anything, not then. But when I turned to leave, I caught my reflection in the window. Only, it wasn't just me in the glass. There was a shape standing behind me. Thin, too thin, with skin the color of dirty snow. Its mouth was open wide, but there was no face. Just a dark hole, like someone had taken an eraser to the center of its head. I didn't sleep that day when I got home. I didn't quit either because rent's still due, and who's gonna believe me anyway? That was my first week. After that first week, I learned to ignore things. You have to, if you want to make it through the shift without losing your mind. I'd walk past the rooms with the call lights glowing and I wouldn't even look. Just kept my eyes down, wrote it off as faulty wiring, and told myself I was imagining the soft scraping sounds coming from under the doors. Most nights, I'd park myself at the security desk in the lobby, the only part of Building C that didn't feel like it was watching me. I'd mess around on my phone, drink terrible vending machine coffee, and count the hours until sunrise. But some nights, the building wouldn't let me ignore it. There was one shift, I think it was a Tuesday, when the power flickered right after midnight. It wasn't a total blackout, just enough to make the lights stutter and the air conditioning hum louder than usual. That's when I heard the elevator. There's only one working elevator in Building C, down by the west hallway, and it's locked after hours. It's keycard access only, even I couldn't use it. But that night, I heard the ding, clear as day, followed by the soft mechanical hum of the doors sliding open. I didn't want to check. Every part of me screamed to stay put, but I've got this stupid sense of duty, or maybe just morbid curiosity, and I figured if someone was in the building who shouldn't be, it was technically my job to deal with it. The hallway was wrong when I got there. The floor felt spongy under my shoes, like I was walking on carpet soaked through with something warm. The walls, the ceiling, everything looked too long, like the whole corridor had been stretched an extra few feet. And at the end of it, the elevator stood open. It was empty. At first. I stepped inside because, again, I'm an idiot, or at least, I was still pretending this was all explainable back then. The buttons were old, the kind that light up dim yellow when you press them, but none of them were lit. The panel showed we were on the 3rd floor, but that didn't make sense because the elevator was only supposed to run between the lobby and the 2nd floor. There is no 3rd floor in Building C. Before I could process that, the doors slid shut behind me. No button was pressed. No sound except my breathing too loud in the tiny space. Then the elevator started moving. It went down. I remember leaning my head against the wall, feeling it vibrate under my skin. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears, and I kept telling myself it was some mechanical glitch, some leftover wiring from before they closed off the upper floors. But I knew even then that I was lying to myself. Because the elevator kept going. Past the lobby. Past the basement. The air got colder and wetter, and the walls started to feel soft under my hands, like old meat wrapped in fabric. The doors slid open, and I don't even know how to explain what I saw. It was a hallway, but not like the others. The ceiling was low enough that I had to hunch, and the walls were covered in something dark and glistening, like mold or thick blood. The floor sloped downward, and at the far end, I saw a figure hunched and trembling, its back to me, its hands pressed flat against the wall like it was listening for something inside. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. And then, so slowly it was almost gentle, its head turned not all the way, just far enough that I could see the side of its face. No eyes. No mouth. Just smooth, pitted skin stretched too tight over bone. It started to crawl toward me, hands and feet dragging, and the sound it made, this wet, gasping wheeze, was the same sound I'd heard my first night in room 308. I slammed the lobby button so hard I cracked the plastic, and for once, the elevator obeyed. The doors closed just before it reached me, and I swear, I felt something press against the other side. When the doors opened again, I was back in the normal building, standing in the empty lobby, my hands shaking so bad I couldn't even pull out my phone. I didn't tell anyone. Who the hell would believe me? But I noticed something the next night, when I forced myself to come back. There's no button for the 3rd floor. There's no record of any floors below the basement, either. But sometimes, just sometimes, when I pass the west hallway, I can hear the elevator hum, like it's moving somewhere beneath us. And every time it dings, I swear the air gets colder. I don't think the hospital is haunted, not in the way people usually mean. It's not ghosts rattling chains or nurses in old uniforms drifting through the halls. It's worse than that. It's like, the building remembers things. Not just the deaths, though God knows there've been plenty. It remembers the people who never left. The ones who died with no family, no paperwork, nothing to tie them to the living world. The unclaimed. That's what the overnight nurse called them, the one who smokes out by the loading dock around 3 a.m. I started hanging out there sometimes, just to have a reason not to walk those halls alone. She told me there were always bodies that didn't get picked up. Homeless people, overdoses, John and Jane Does who came through the ER and never left. If no one claims them after a certain amount of time, they just go into the system. Cremated. Forgotten. But some of them stayed. There was one in particular. She mentioned a man they found curled up in a stairwell over in Building B, dead for days before anyone noticed. No ID, no fingerprints in the system, just a middle-aged guy with dirt under his nails and lungs full of blood. They moved his body to the old morgue in Building C while they waited for the paperwork to clear. That was 5 years ago. I asked what happened to him, and the nurse just shook her head. He's still here, she said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Some folks, they don't leave. Doesn't matter what you do with the body. That's when I started to notice him. Not all at once. It was subtle at first, the shape I thought I saw through the narrow window in the stairwell door, or the faint metallic smell hanging in the air even after the cleaning crew mopped. Then it got worse. Every time I walked past certain rooms, especially the ones at the far end of the west hallway, I'd see wet footprints on the tile. Bare feet, no shoes. They'd start at the middle of the hall, like someone just appeared there, and they'd end at the door to room 317. Room 317 doesn't exist. At least, not on the floor plan I was given. There's number 317, it jumps from 316 to 318, and 318th door has been padlocked since before I started. But the footprints don't lie. They always stop at that door, and if I stand there too long, I swear I can hear something, a faint wet tapping, like fingertips against glass. Once, I worked up the nerve to touch the door handle, just to prove to myself it was locked. But the second my hand made contact, the tapping stopped. The silence was so complete it felt like the air had been sucked out of the hallway. And then, right on the other side of the door, something scraped down the length of it. Like nails. Or bones. I didn't open it. I didn't want to know. That's the night I stopped asking questions. I just started doing my rounds faster, keeping my head down, ignoring the things my brain was screaming at me to notice. And it worked for a while. But the unclaimed? They don't like being ignored. And some of them, they remember you, too. There's this trick your brain plays on you when you're alone in a place like that. You start thinking you're the only living thing there. It's easier that way. You tell yourself the building is empty, silent, dead, and you just have to make it through the night. If you believe that hard enough, you can almost pretend the noises aren't real. But something changed about a month into the job. That's when I started hearing my name. It wasn't loud, just a whisper threading through the static hum of the hallway lights. I'd be halfway through my rounds, clipboard in hand, and I'd hear it soft, almost apologetic. Ethan. The first few times, I thought I was losing it. Sleep deprivation, nerves, maybe even some leftover high school paranoia about ghosts and dark hallways. But the more I heard it, the more I realized something was wrong. It didn't sound like my name. It was close, just close enough to make me turn my head, but it was always a little off. Like whoever, or whatever, was saying it couldn't quite get it right. Sometimes it was Ian or Nathan. Other times it was a long, wet-sounding slur, stretching out into something not human at all. But it was always trying to call me. I started dreading my name, even when my boss said it over the radio. Every time I heard it, it felt like something was leaning just over my shoulder, waiting for me to answer back. Then came the night with the clipboard. I just finished a lap around the west hallway and was back at the security desk, filling out my log, when I saw the name written at the top of my sheet. We're supposed to write our names at the start of every shift, but I hadn't written this. My pen was still tucked behind my ear, untouched. It didn't say Ethan. It said Caleb. I stared at it for way too long, trying to convince myself someone was screwing with me, except no one else had access to the security desk during my shift. And the handwriting? It was mine, every loop and jagged line matched my own, but I had no memory of writing it. That's when I heard the footsteps, bare feet slapping against the tile. Coming from the west hallway. The hallway I just walked. I stood up, every muscle in my body screaming at me to run, but I couldn't move. I just watched the corner where the hallway bent out of sight, waiting for whatever was coming. When it finally appeared, I almost collapsed. It was me. Or something that looked like me. Same uniform, same hair, but the face was wrong. Like a bad drawing, too many lines in the wrong places. Its eyes were too small, mouth too wide, and it didn't move quite right, like the joints bent a second too late. But the worst part was the clipboard in its hand. It held it up as it shambled closer, and even from 10 feet away, I could read the name scrawled across the top. Caleb. I didn't stick around to ask questions. I bolted for the emergency stairwell, slamming the door behind me, and only when I hit the outside air did I let myself breathe again. But the thing is, I don't know a Caleb. I don't have any friends named Caleb. I've never worked with anyone named Caleb. At least not that I remember. And that's what's been eating at me ever since. The way it said the name, the way it wrote it down in my own hand. It wasn't trying to haunt me. It was trying to remind me. What if I wasn't the first me to work this shift? I didn't sleep when I got home after that night. I sat on the edge of my bed, hands still shaking, replaying what I saw, the thing wearing my uniform, holding my clipboard, with my face stretched into something that wasn't mine. And that name. Caleb. It didn't feel like a random haunting anymore. It felt personal. Like the building was trying to tell me something, and I'd been too stupid to listen. So, the next day, still running on zero sleep, I went digging. Hospitals have layers, like old skin peeling back, and every time you scratch the surface, you find more rot. I started with the security logs, the ones going back a few years, and it didn't take long to find him. Caleb Ramirez. He was me, or at least, he had my job. Night shift security for Building C, same rounds, same clipboard, same shitty vending machine coffee. The only difference was, Caleb's shift stopped suddenly. No termination paperwork. No resignation letter. Just gone. I had to go deeper. I found an older nurse, one who worked the day shift back then, and I asked casually, like I wasn't about to throw up, if she remembered Caleb. Her face went still. Not surprised. Not confused. Just blank. "He's still here," she said. The same words the smoker nurse used, talking about the unclaimed. I asked what happened, and she wouldn't or couldn't say. She just told me the same rumor I'd heard whispered a dozen times by then. Sometimes the building keeps people. I wanted to believe it was just old hospital folklore, but the way she said it, like it was a fact, something you just learned to live with, that rattled me worse than any ghost. I found the last known entry Caleb wrote, still filed away in a drawer no one had touched in years. His handwriting was neat, almost too neat for a tired night shift guard. The log was normal right up until his final round. The entry for 3:17 a.m. just said, "Room 317, door open, occupant, me?" That was it. No follow-up. No report. That was his last entry before he disappeared. That night, I made myself walk past room 317 again. I had to. I needed to see if anything had changed. The footprints were there, wet, bare, perfectly placed. But this time, the door was slightly ajar. Not open, not closed. Just enough to see a slice of the dark inside. I was done running. I pressed my palm against the door, felt the unnatural cold seeping through the wood, and slowly pushed it open. Inside was a hospital room, but wrong. The walls were bulging, the floor sloped, the furniture all shoved to one side like the room itself was tilting. And in the far corner, hunched over the bed, was Caleb. Or what was left of him. He was wearing my uniform. The one I wore on my first night, back when I was still new and stupid. His skin was translucent, paper-thin, like it had been stretched too far. His head turned just enough for me to see his face, and it was my face. Every detail but too pale, too wet, like he'd been pulled from a drain. "Ethan," he whispered, but the voice was hollow, like it had to travel through water to reach me. I wanted to run. Every muscle screamed for me to turn around and pretend I never saw it. But something inside me, some awful, gnawing need to know, kept me frozen. "What happened to you?" I asked. His mouth stretched wide, too wide, until it split at the corners. And then, in my voice, perfect, exactly my voice, he answered. "I took your shift. Now you take mine." The door slammed shut behind me. I didn't sleep after that, but not because of nightmares. It was because I didn't know if I'd wake up as me. The rules of the hospital, if you could even call them rules, were starting to make sense in the worst possible way. There's no quitting the night shift in Building C. There's no moving on, no 2 weeks' notice. There's just replacement. One guard in, one guard out. Caleb wasn't fired. He wasn't transferred. He was absorbed. And now, the building was getting ready to do the same to me. That next shift felt different from the second I walked through the doors. The air was thicker, heavier, like I was stepping into a room someone had just screamed in. I didn't even have to look at the west hallway to know the footprints would be there, waiting. They always were. But tonight there was something else. A clipboard, balanced perfectly on the security desk, with my name already written at the top. Only it wasn't my name. It was Caleb. The letters were neat, too neat, like someone had spent hours practicing my handwriting until it was perfect. A signature that wasn't mine anymore. A signature that belonged to the person the building wanted me to be. I didn't touch it. I wasn't even sure it was really there. Maybe my brain was cracking under the weight of too many sleepless nights. Or maybe Building C was breaking me down, reshaping me into something that would fit the gap Caleb left. At 3:17 a.m., I stopped walking. I was standing at the door to room 317. The door was wide open now, and the room was lit from within. Not with the usual cold fluorescent light, but with something darker like the glow you see behind your eyelids when you press your palms into your eyes too hard. I stepped inside because there was nothing else to do. Either I was going to finish this, or it was going to finish me. The room had changed again. The bed was gone. The equipment was gone. The walls were pulsing, slow and steady, like the whole space was breathing around me. In the center stood a figure. Me. No distortions this time. No stretched skin or misplaced features. Just me, standing there with my arms at my sides, head slightly tilted, eyes locked on mine. "Your shift's almost over," it said, using my voice, but too calm, too final. "What are you?" I asked. My voice cracked, like I was afraid of the answer. It smiled, and that was worse than anything else so far. Because it wasn't a cruel smile, or a sinister one. It was relieved. Like someone being released from a burden they'd carried too long. "I'm Caleb," it said. "And so are you." I took a step back. The floor felt soft beneath me, like the skin over a full stomach. "No," I whispered. "I'm Ethan." The thing's head tilted further, its neck creaking like damp wood. "Not anymore." I ran. I didn't care if it chased me, didn't care if the hospital swallowed me whole. I just ran out of the room, down the hall, past the security desk where the clipboard still waited. I crashed through the emergency exit, into the freezing night air, and I didn't stop until I reached my car. I sat there for hours, shaking, watching the windows of Building C. The hospital sat still, too still, like it was pretending none of it had happened. But I knew better. Because when the first day shift security guard showed up at 7 a.m., they waved at me. And they called me Caleb. I didn't correct them when they called me Caleb. What was the point? I was too tired, too rattled, and a small part of me started to wonder if maybe they were right, maybe my name was Caleb. Maybe this was some prolonged mental collapse, a breakdown I hadn't even noticed slipping over me like a second skin. I drove home, windows cracked open just to feel the cold air on my face, something to anchor me in my own body. I was still me. I had to be. But when I got to my apartment, something wasn't right. My front door was unlocked. Not kicked in, not tampered with, just unlocked, like I'd forgotten to lock it before my shift. Except I knew I had. I always triple-checked. The job does that to you. Inside, everything looked normal. My jacket was still draped over the couch, my empty ramen bowls stacked in the sink, my unmade bed exactly how I left it. It was all familiar, but it felt staged. Like a set made to look like my life. The details were too perfect. Too intentional. Then I saw it. The second pair of shoes by the door. Same brand as mine. Same size. Same mud streaked across the toe from when I stepped in that puddle by the loading dock last week. Identical. There was someone else living here. I crept through the apartment, heart thudding so hard it felt like my ribs might crack. Every corner I turned, I expected to see him, the other me, the thing from room 317, standing there with my face, my clothes, my life. But the apartment was empty. Almost. On the kitchen table was a clipboard. I knew before I picked it up what it would say. At the top, written in that too perfect version of my handwriting, was a name. Ethan. Not Caleb. Ethan. I stood there, shaking, trying to understand what it meant. If the building had already started replacing me with Caleb, why was Ethan still here? Then, from the bathroom, I heard the soft sound of a shower running. I hadn't turned it on. I moved toward the door, every step feeling like my feet were sinking into something too soft, too warm. I pushed the door open. The shower curtain was drawn. Through the thin plastic, I could see a figure. Same height. Same shape. Same face. But it wasn't Caleb. Not the stretched, broken thing from room 317. No, this was me, the me I remembered. The real Ethan. He turned the water off and stood there, dripping, hands at his sides. Then, slowly, he reached out and pulled the curtain back. We locked eyes. I don't know which of us screamed first. I stumbled back, nearly slipping on the bathroom tile, heart hammering in my ears so loud I couldn't think. I stood there, soaking wet, water still running down his arms, his face twisted into the exact same expression of horror I knew was on my own. "What the fuck?" he started, but his voice caught, like it couldn't decide whether to come out angry or terrified. I couldn't speak. My mind couldn't piece it together fast enough. I was looking at myself, down to the small scar on my chin from a skateboarding accident in middle school. Same tired eyes, same black security uniform. And yet there was something off. Not like the thing in room 317, no stretched skin or too wide smile. This version of me was too new. His skin was clearer, his hair less greasy, his stance just a little straighter. Like the best possible version of me, if I hadn't been ground down by too many night shifts and too little sleep. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded. I opened my mouth to answer, but before I could, the memories hit me. Not like remembering a dream, more like remembering something I'd deliberately buried. A whole other life, unraveling in my mind like it had been waiting just under the surface. I saw Caleb, but not as the twisted thing in the hallway. I saw him standing at my locker, giving me a lazy smile on my first day at the hospital. He trained me, showed me how to skip the bullshit rounds, which vending machine gave free sodas if you kicked it just right, which nurses were cool with security hanging out at the desk. He was my friend. Until he went missing. And when he did, that's when I got his job. I stumbled back against the wall, heart pounding in my throat. That was the twist. That was the part one hadn't let myself remember. It wasn't just a haunted hospital picking random people to torment. I was Caleb's replacement. And now, standing in front of me, the cleaner, newer version of me, he was mine. The hospital doesn't just swallow people whole. It copies them, recycles them, cleans them up, resets them, and sends them back into the world like nothing ever happened. But it can't do it perfectly. Something always leaks through. The memories, the fractures, the ghost of the last person they were. "Who are you?" the other me asked again. This time, I knew exactly how to answer. "I'm who you were before." He didn't believe me. How could he? His brow furrowed, and I could see the gears turning, trying to rationalize the impossible. I didn't wait for him to figure it out. I grabbed the nearest thing I could, a can of shaving cream, and hurled it at the mirror, shattering the reflection into a spiderweb of cracks. He flinched, but he didn't disappear. Because he wasn't a ghost. He was real. And so was I. We couldn't both exist. The hospital had made a mistake. He didn't lunge at me like some horror movie monster, and that was almost worse. He just stood there, dripping water onto the tile, staring at me with my own eyes. I could see the confusion turning into fear, fear turning into anger. "Is this a joke?" he asked, voice sharp, the way mine gets when I'm about to lose my temper. "Who are you? How did you get in here?" I wanted to laugh, hysterical, sleep-deprived laughter, because how do you explain to yourself that you're not supposed to exist? That there's only supposed to be one of us, and the hospital fucked up. Instead, I said, "I work the night shift at Building C. Just like you." The color drained from his face. That's when I knew he remembered. Not everything, not yet, but the word night shift hit something deep. Something the hospital couldn't scrub clean. "You're lying," he said, but there was no force behind it. Just doubt, the kind that seeps in when your gut knows you're screwed, but your brain hasn't caught up yet. I took a step closer, and so did he. Perfectly in sync, like a reflection that decided to climb out of the glass. "Do you remember Caleb?" I asked. He froze. The name hit him like a slap. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. And then, so quietly I almost missed it, he whispered, "He trained me." I nodded. "Yeah. And now you're training me." The other me shook his head, hard, like he could physically fling the thought out of his skull. "No," he said, "no, I'm Ethan. I've always been Ethan." So was I. The silence between us stretched, thick and suffocating, until it felt like the whole room was shrinking. He was breathing hard now, so was I, both of us locked in this sick, impossible standoff. "I'm real," he said, his voice cracking. "So am I." His eyes darted to the kitchen table, to the clipboard. My clipboard. Our clipboard. I saw him piece it together, the same way I had, that the hospital wasn't done with either of us yet. There's only supposed to be one. And that meant one of us had to go. He lunged first, wet feet slapping against the tile, and I barely dodged. We crashed into the hallway, fists flying in sloppy, desperate swings. There's no training for fighting yourself. Every move I made, he matched. Every punch I threw, he countered. It was like trying to beat my own shadow to death. We slammed into the wall, into the coffee table, into the bookshelf. Furniture splintered. Picture frames shattered. I could hear myself panting, both from my own mouth and his, overlapping in a sick chorus. But the worst part, the part that still makes me sick to think about, was how familiar it felt. Like I'd done this before. Like Caleb had done this before. The hospital doesn't just recycle us. It makes us fight for the right to exist. I grabbed the first thing I could, a busted lamp, the cord still dangling, and swung it hard. It cracked against his temple, sending him sprawling. My knees hit the floor beside him. He groaned my groan and tried to sit up. I grabbed the lamp again, raised it high. His eyes locked onto mine, and for a second, I didn't see rage or fear. I saw understanding. Because deep down, we both knew. This wasn't the first time. And it wouldn't be the last. I didn't want to do it. That's the part one need you to understand. There was no thrill, no adrenaline rush, no righteous sense of protecting my life. It was just mechanical. Like my body knew the steps before my mind caught up. I swung the lamp again. The base hit his skull with a dull, wet crack. His body spasmed once, fingers twitching against the floorboards, then went still. His eyes, my eyes, stayed open, wide and glassy, locked on a spot just over my shoulder. I didn't move. I couldn't. Some part of me expected him to dissolve, to fade away like some malfunctioning ghost, proof he wasn't real. But he didn't. He was solid and heavy, bleeding onto my floor, a growing stain seeping into the wood. I killed myself. But even that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out with shaking hands. It was a text from an unknown number. Shift complete. Replacement secured. Return to Building C. I dropped the phone like it burned me. They knew. The hospital, the thing inside it, whatever's been running the show all along, it knew. This was never about hauntings or accidents or weird glitches. It was a system. Caleb fought his replacement. Now I fought mine. I was never hired to be Ethan. I was hired to be the next Caleb. And once the hospital decided my time was up, it printed out a new Ethan, shiny, clean, ready to step into my shoes. Until there were two of us. And in Building C, two is too many. I sat on the floor beside the body, my body, and stared at my hands, shaking, covered in blood that felt colder than it should. It hit me, all at once, that no matter how many times I showered, no matter how much I scrubbed, I'd never be clean again. Because the truth is, the hospital doesn't care who wins these fights. It only cares that there's always one left. One guard. One name. One uniform. And the second you clock in for the night shift, you're already halfway to becoming the next body on the floor. That's why the building's always cold. It's full of unclaimed replacements. And some nights, when I pass room 317, I swear I can still hear my own voice, not the one I use now, the other one whispering through the door. Don't forget my name.